The dust rising on the horizon looked like the end of everything Abigail Reynolds had fought to protect. It rolled toward her ranch in thick clouds under the blazing October sun of 1883, and deep in her heart, she already knew what it meant. When the 3 black carriages came into view, each marked with the seal of the Territorial Bank of Santa Fe, the last fragile hope inside her chest broke. She stood frozen on the porch of the ranch house her father had built with his own hands 20 years earlier. The wood beneath her boots felt steady, but her body did not. Her fingers gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. This house had once been filled with laughter. Now, it felt like it was holding its breath. The carriages rolled to a stop in front of the yard. Men in dark suits climbed down slowly, yet brushing dust from their coats as if they had all the time in the world. One of them, tall and thin with a long mustache and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Reynolds," he called out firmly, "I am Howard Grenville, representative of the Territorial Bank of Santa Fe. I believe you know why we are here." Abigail forced herself to move. She walked down the porch steps one at a time. She was 24 years old, but grief and worry had aged her. Her auburn hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her green eyes carried more pain than most women twice her age. "I asked for more time," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I have buyers interested in my horses. I only need another month." Grenville opened his leather satchel and pulled out folded papers. "You are 4 months behind on your loan payments. The total amount due is $2,300. The court has ordered us to seize this property and all assets." $2,300. It sounded like a death sentence. Abigail had $17 in her pocket. That was all. The drought had killed half her cattle. The rest she had sold cheap, just to survive. Her mother had died when she was 16. Her father had passed 2 years earlier. The ranch was all she had left of them. The other men began walking around the property, pointing at the barn, the horses, the fences, taking notes, taking everything. "Please," she whispered. "This is my home." "Business is business," Grenville replied without feeling. "You have until sundown to gather your personal belongings." The sound of hoofbeats cut through the air before she could answer. Everyone turned, and a single rider was coming hard down the road, his horse moving fast and strong, dust flying behind him. He rode like a man who did not fear anything. As he came closer, Abigail saw the details clearly. He wore a dark brown duster that moved behind him like wings. A black hat shaded his face. A red bandana rested at his neck. His horse was a powerful black and white paint, muscles tight under its skin. He pulled the reins sharply and stopped just outside the line of carriages. In one smooth motion, he dismounted. When he removed his hat, Abigail saw his face for the first time. He was around 28 or 29. Dark hair brushed his collar. His jaw was strong, touched by light stubble. But it was his gray eyes that caught her breath. They were intense but gentle at the same time. "What is happening here?" he asked. "No, this does not concern you," Grenville answered quickly. The cowboy looked past him, his eyes locked with Abigail's. For a moment, the world seemed to go silent. "I asked, what is happening?" he repeated, his voice harder now. "And the lady looks distressed. That makes it my concern." "She is in default on her loan," Grenville snapped. "We are seizing the property." The cowboy did not look away from Abigail. "How much does she owe?" Grenville blinked. $2,300. The cowboy reached inside his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. It made a solid metallic sound when he set it on the carriage hood. Slowly, calmly, he untied it. Gold coins spilled into his hand. He began counting them one by one. Each coin hit the metal surface with a sharp ring that echoed across the yard. Abigail stared in disbelief. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his mouth. "I know enough," he said. The pile of gold grew higher, $20 pieces stacked in the sunlight. When he finished, he stepped back. "There is $2,300 in United States gold," he said. "Count it." Grenville's face had gone pale. He stepped forward and began counting. The other men gathered around, watching in silence. Minutes passed. Finally, Grenville straightened. "It is all here." "Then I believe your business is done," the cowboy replied calmly. "Take your money and leave." It took more paperwork and angry muttering, but within half an hour, the carriages were gone. The dust that had once looked like destruction now faded into the distance. Abigail stood there, unable to move. The cowboy tied his horse to the post and walked toward her slowly. "You just paid my entire debt," she said. "Why?" He studied her face carefully. "My name is Ethan Turner," he said. "I have been saving for 6 years, working cattle drives. I came here to buy land and start my own ranch." He hesitated slightly. "I saw you 3 days ago in town. You were arguing at the general store about extending credit. I followed you back here. I watched you working with your horses. You have a gift." Her eyes widened. "You were watching me?" He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "That sounds worse than it is. I could not help myself. Then today, I heard the bank men talking. I could not let them take this from you." Tears blurred her vision. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said again, softer this time. Something inside her broke. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened in surprise, then carefully returned the embrace. He smelled like leather and dust and clean air. For the first time in months, she did not feel alone. When she pulled back, she wiped her eyes quickly. "I cannot repay you." "What if we make it a partnership?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You have land and knowledge. I have money left and experience. We rebuild this ranch together." She searched his face for doubt or trickery. She found none. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because I believe in you," he answered simply. "And I want something of my own. Something permanent." The word permanent echoed in her heart. "All right," she said carefully. "Yeah, but we do this properly. Legal papers, equal partnership." He nodded immediately. "Agreed." He held out his hand. "Partners." She placed her hand in his. "Partners." That night they ate a simple meal at her kitchen table. Beans, cornbread, coffee. The sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky orange and red. They talked about fences, water sources, cattle prices. But soon the talk turned personal. Ethan told her about growing up in Texas, about his father, a lawman killed in the line of duty, about leaving home at 16 and working cattle drives across the plains, saving every dollar. "I wanted land," he said quietly. "Roots, a place no one could take away." Abigail felt her chest tighten. "My parents built this place from nothing," she told him. "After they died, I thought I was losing it all." "You are not losing any more," he said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was simple, warm, steady. She believed him. The next morning they rode into town and signed partnership papers with a lawyer named Samuel Morton. Everything was written clearly. Equal shares, equal rights. From that day forward, they worked side by side. They repaired broken fences, checked water lines, counted cattle, planned breeding for her horses. Ethan purchased 20 head of strong young cattle from a rancher near Santa Fe. Under his steady guidance and her deep knowledge of the land, the ranch slowly began to breathe again. In the evenings, they sat on the porch. They talked about dreams, about families, about the future. One night under the pale moonlight, he looked at her in a way that made her heart race. "I want to kiss you," he said honestly, "but only if you want it too." She did not answer with words. She leaned forward. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, stronger. It felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. When they parted, both were breathless. "We take it slow," she said softly. "We are partners first." He smiled. Partners first. But something had already changed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. By mid-November, the wind across the New Mexico plains turned sharp and restless. The grass thinned. The nights grew long. Ethan and Abigail worked from sunrise to sunset, determined to strengthen the ranch before winter fully settled in. Their days were filled with hard labor. They rode fence lines together, fixing broken posts and tightening wire. They counted cattle twice, making sure none had wandered off. Ethan showed her how to rotate grazing areas to protect what little grass remained. Abigail taught him which horses were steady and which needed patience. They moved like two people who had known each other for years instead of weeks. In the evenings, after the animals were fed and the tools were put away, they would sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, sharing quiet conversations under the fading light. The ranch no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. But the feeling between them had grown deeper than business. One night, as the sky turned deep blue and the first stars appeared, Abigail found herself studying Ethan's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the way his gray eyes softened when he looked at her, the slight crease between his brows when he was thinking. "You are staring," he said gently, without looking at her. She smiled despite herself. "Maybe I am." He turned then, his expression serious. "Abigail, I know we agreed to keep things steady, but I need to say something." Her heart began to pound. "I have never met anyone like you," he continued. "You are stronger than anyone I know, and kinder. Every day I wake up grateful that I rode down that road when I did." She swallowed. "Yeah, you changed my life. So did you." The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was full. He reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was gentle, asking permission without words. This time, when he kissed her, it was not cautious. It was certain. From that night forward, their partnership became something more. They were careful. They kept working hard. They signed every paper properly. But in the quiet spaces between chores, they allowed themselves to feel what had already taken root. Winter settled in fully by early December. Frost clung to the fences in the morning. The wind rattled the barn doors at night. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Ethan had ridden out to check the northern fence line. He promised he would be back before noon. When noon passed, Abigail felt a small flicker of worry. When 2 o'clock came and went, that flicker turned into fear. She saddled her horse and rode hard toward the northern pasture, calling his name as she went. She found him near a dry arroyo. His horse stood nearby, reins dragging. Ethan was on the ground, pale and sweating. His left leg was twisted in a way no leg should ever be twisted. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "I am here," she whispered as she slid from her saddle and knelt beside him. "Rattlesnake," he said through clenched teeth. "Horse spooked. Through me." She examined the leg quickly. The bone had not broken through the skin, but it was badly fractured. "We need to get you home," she said firmly, though her hands were shaking. Getting him onto his horse was slow and painful. He tried to hide his groans, but she heard them. Once she led his horse carefully back to the ranch, walking most of the way to avoid jarring him. As soon as she got him into bed, she rode into town at full speed to fetch Dr. Michael Preston. The doctor arrived before nightfall. Setting the bone was brutal. Ethan gripped Abigail's hand so hard it left marks. Sweat covered his face, but he did not cry out. When it was finished, the leg was bound tightly with splints. 6 weeks at least, the doctor said firmly. No riding, no heavy work. If he pushes it too soon, he will walk with a limp for life. After the doctor left, the house felt quiet. Ethan stared at the ceiling, anger flashing across his face. This is the worst timing. I cannot even stand. You are not useless, Abigail said sharply. You are injured. The ranch needs me. The ranch has both of us, she answered. Now, it has more of me. The next morning, she rode into town again and hired help. Carlos Martinez, a steady ranch hand in his 40s, agreed to work through winter. He was quiet, experienced, and respectful. With his help, Abigail took on the heavy labor. She rose before dawn. She fed the cattle. She checked the horses. She repaired small breaks in the fence. She listened carefully to Ethan's instructions from the bed where he lay restless and frustrated. In the evenings, she sat beside him and updated him on every detail. She valued his knowledge. She asked his advice. The injury that could have broken their progress, instead, deepened their bond. There was intimacy in small acts. She helped him wash. She helped him dress. She steadied him when he practiced walking with crutches. Their fingers lingered longer. Their eyes met more often. One snowy evening, as she sat mending one of his shirts by lamplight, he spoke suddenly. Marry me. Her needle froze mid-stitch. What did you say? Marry me, he repeated. I love you. I loved you before I understood what it meant. I do not want a life without you in it. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. You are stuck in bed, she said softly. You cannot even kneel. I would crawl if I had to, he replied. Her breath trembled. I was drowning when you rode up that day, she said. You gave me back everything. Then you gave me your heart. Do you love me? He asked quietly. She nodded. With everything I have. His face broke into a smile she would never forget. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Tucumcari. It was a simple ceremony. A handful of townspeople attended. Abigail wore her mother's altered wedding dress. Ethan stood carefully with the help of a cane, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady. I promise to stand beside you through every storm. She answered with equal strength. I promise to build a life with you that would make our parents proud. When he kissed her as his wife, the applause from the small church felt like thunder. They celebrated back at the ranch. There was food, music, laughter. Even with his injured leg, Ethan held her close and swayed gently to the slow songs. That night, when the house grew quiet and the guests had gone, they lay side by side in the room that had once felt lonely. Now it felt full. Spring arrived with promise. The mares delivered healthy foals, and the cattle herd grew stronger. Ethan's leg healed slowly. There was still a faint limp, but it did not slow him much. They worked together as husband and wife, as partners in every sense. Then, in late May, Abigail felt something different. Her monthly cycle did not come. At first, she said nothing. She waited. Then she rode into town to see Dr. Preston. When she returned home that afternoon, Ethan knew something had changed. She stood in the doorway, hands trembling slightly. "We are going to have a baby," she whispered. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he laughed, a full, joyful sound that filled the house. He crossed the room in 3 steps and lifted her carefully, spinning her once before setting her down. "A baby," he breathed, pressing his hand to her stomach. "Our baby." Tears streamed down both their faces. The summer was hot and heavy, but hope carried them through. Ethan took on more physical labor to protect her. He built a cradle in the barn during quiet evenings, carving small horses into the wood. When he presented it to her, she cried openly. Their son was born on December 3rd during a sharp winter frost. The labor was long and frightening. Ethan stayed by her side every moment. When the baby finally cried, strong and loud, Ethan wept without shame. But they named him James Reynolds Turner, after her father. Holding their son together, they felt something even stronger than love. They felt legacy. The ranch that had once nearly been taken now echoed with the sound of a newborn's cry. And the man who had arrived like a stranger on a dusty road had become her husband, her partner, and the father of her child. But neither of them knew that life would soon test them again in ways neither had ever imagined. The winter after James was born was harder than any season before it. The cold settled deep into the land. Frost coated the fences each morning. The wind howled across the plains and rattled the barn doors through the night. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth. There was the sound of a baby crying, then laughing. There was the smell of fresh coffee and wood smoke. And there was love. James grew strong quickly. He had dark hair like Ethan and eyes that were slowly turning gray. Abigail would sit by the fire with him wrapped in blankets, humming the same lullabies her mother once sang to her. Ethan would kneel beside them, touching the tiny fingers of his son, with wonder in his eyes. The ranch continued to improve. Buyers began coming from other towns to see the horses. The young foals showed excellent bloodlines, just as Ethan had predicted. The cattle herd expanded steadily. Money began to flow in instead of out. By the end of 1885, they had paid back every dollar Ethan had invested and still had savings in the bank. The same bank that once tried to take everything now greeted them with respect. One evening in the spring of 1886, as the sun set over their land, and Abigail and Ethan sat on the porch watching James take his first unsteady steps across the yard. "Do you ever think about that day?" Abigail asked softly. "The day I rode up?" Ethan replied. She nodded. "I think about it every week," he admitted. "If I had been 5 minutes later, your life would be different. My life would be different." She squeezed his hand. "You were not 5 minutes late. You were exactly on time." He turned to her with a small smile. "Maybe we both were." Time moved forward the way it always does, steady and unstoppable. In 1888, Abigail gave birth to their second child, a daughter. They named her Emma Rose. She had auburn hair like Abigail and eyes full of curiosity from the moment she opened them. James adored his baby sister. He followed Abigail everywhere, wanting to help with every small task. And Ethan pretended to be stern, but he melted whenever Emma wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb. The ranch grew along with their family. They built a larger barn, added new corrals, hired 2 full-time ranch hands. What had once been a struggling property became one of the most respected ranches in the territory. Travelers began calling it Turner Ranch instead of Reynolds Ranch. The name felt strong, permanent. But life was never without challenges. In the summer of 1889, a severe drought hit the region. Grass turned brittle. Water levels dropped. Neighboring ranches began selling cattle at desperate prices. Abigail stood in the field one afternoon, staring at the dry earth, fear creeping back into her chest. The memory of that first desperate year returned like a shadow. As Ethan came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "We have savings," he said calmly. "We have hay stored. We prepared for this." She nodded slowly. "I just do not want to feel that helpless again." "You are not that woman anymore," he reminded her. "You are stronger. We both are." The drought lasted months, but they survived it. Careful planning and steady patience carried them through. When rain finally returned, the land seemed to breathe again. Years passed. James grew into a tall, capable young man who handled cattle with confidence beyond his age. Emma proved to have her mother's gift with horses. She could calm even the wildest colt with a soft voice and steady hands. In 1895, Abigail gave birth to twins, Daniel and Sarah. The house that once felt too quiet now overflowed with noise and life. Ethan expanded the home, adding new rooms with the same care Abigail's father once used. Laughter echoed through the halls. Boots lined the doorway. Toys lay scattered on the floor. On Sundays, the family rode out together. Ethan told stories of his cattle drive days. Abigail pointed out wildflowers and explained how her parents first claimed the land. The children listened wide-eyed, knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Abigail and Ethan renewed their vows in the same small church where they first married. Their 4 children stood beside them. Nearly the entire town attended. When it was Abigail's turn to speak, her voice trembled. "10 years ago, you rode into my life when I thought everything was over. You paid a debt I could never repay with money, but I have tried to repay it every day with love." Ethan's eyes shone. "You saved me too," he said. "Before I met you, I was working towards something without knowing what it was. You gave me purpose. You gave me home." They kissed while their children cheered. The ranch became a symbol of hard work and devotion in the region. People often told the story of the cowboy who arrived at the last moment and saved a ranch from being seized. But the real story was much deeper than that. It was not only about gold, it was about partnership. It was about choosing each other every single day. By 1900, James turned 18 and became an official partner in the ranch. Emma was being courted, though Ethan watched every young man closely. The twins filled the house with endless energy. One quiet evening, as Abigail and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset spread across the New Mexico sky, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you remember what you told me the first night?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I said I wanted something permanent." She gestured toward the land, the barn, the children's laughter drifting from inside the house. "You built it?" He shook his head gently. "We built it." Silence settled around them, peaceful and steady. His hair had turned silver at the temples. Fine lines framed her eyes. Their hands were rough from years of work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man and woman on that porch in 1883. The attraction had not faded. The respect had not weakened. The love had only deepened. Abigail thought back to the day the bank carriages rolled toward her home. Yet she remembered the dust cloud that looked like destruction. She remembered the hopelessness that weighed on her chest. And then she remembered the rider, the man who stepped down from his horse without hesitation, the sound of gold coins hitting metal. The moment everything changed. "You were my miracle," she said softly. Ethan tightened his arm around her. "And you were mine." Inside the house, their children's voices rose in laughter. The land stretched out before them, strong and alive under the fading light. The cowboy who arrived as they were seizing her ranch had paid every dollar she owed. But what he truly gave her was not gold. He gave her partnership. He gave her family. He gave her a future. And as the stars appeared above the New Mexico sky, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that the dust cloud she once feared had carried not ruin, but destiny. Together, they had built something worth more than money. They had built a legacy of love that would stand long after they were gone, and it had all begun the moment a stranger chose to care.